Hello, 1301. I'm trying to go 4 for 4 without any retakes, like straight through. I like this lesson. I teach it a lot. I like the picture theory. I like looking at the pictures. That helps y'all understand better. If you hadn't noticed my C-Rob welcome video, I had that more professionally done, and it's the same basic information with camera, and I practiced a little more. But coronavirus, you got to do what you got to do. But I wanted to go over the Said outline that's in Module 2. Again, you don't have to answer questions on these. It's sort of an outline I would do in a face-to-face class when I was lecturing. And again, in some of the other videos, I talked about the formation of the state of Israel in 1945 after World War II. So you're a Palestinian, your family, your grandmother, your great-grandfather have lived in that house for 200 years. And then all of a sudden, the governments get together, the rich governments, and say, you got to move. Your grandmother's house is now in Israel. Your grandmother has to move. So on my sheet, Edward Said and Gene Moore theme sheet, it says Middle East as villain, Middle East as other. And usually I would start the class discussion. I would ask the class what they thought of the Middle East. Do they have 50 goats and 51 AK-47 machine guns, and do they hate us? I would ask them, what's the capital of Iran? And of course, it's Iran City. Not really. But maybe somewhere in a humanities class, you heard about the concept of the other of othering. So to some degree, like Rob Van Dam, the wrestler, we have all the money, we have all the power. What do we know about Iran? What do we know about Palestine? Bunch of goats, bunch of guns, they pray all the time. We really don't know anything about them because we have all the money, we have all the power. And I don't know, I've never been to the Middle East, but I got the feeling a kid in class in Tehran right now knows that the capital of Texas is Texas City. So I think the world knows more about us than we know about them. And maybe that's part of why many people think they hate us. And usually I would ask my face-to-face class, do people in the Middle East hate us, and then why? But the concept of othering, you put them on the margins. They're not as rich, they're not as pretty as we are. They're over there like on the margins. And then I assume a lot of you are young, I don't know. Young's relative, but I would ask about 9/11 and terrorism. I would ask my students, like, did they remember anything about 9/11? And a lot of the students in the seats were 2 years old. They don't remember a lot. I was teaching at Kent State in Ohio. School got canceled. I would walk around campus in the afternoon, and there'd be girls on a bench crying. There'd be no one in the dining hall. And the day before, there'd be 1,000 people in the dining hall. So I would ask about the impact on 9/11 on us. I would ask about flying. I would ask, like, you have to take your shoes off when you get on a plane now because that's attached to terrorism. And I would say, if you're getting on a plane and there's a guy with a turban and he's speaking Farsi, you pay a little more attention. And then that would get to racial profiling, things like that. Maybe there's a connection with the coronavirus now to racial profiling. And also on the note says underdog. I know it's a long way to go, but in sports, if it's like a pretty boy team from New York or California, I'd be more likely to root for the Kansas City Chiefs or the Detroit Lions. Is there something about these people are so beaten down, 80 years of poverty and violence and terrorism, somewhere in the mix, do we feel their pain? And you could maybe argue that's elitist. We're looking down on them because they don't have, boats and iPads like we do. But be thinking about Middle Easterners as underdogs too. Do we want to help them, or do we think they're terrorists? Whatever you think, whatever your mom thinks probably matters too. I talked about this a little before, but Said's narrative style, the note says hybridization, memory, history, argument, mixed time, character, and place, displacement, no stability or sense of home. And I said that in one of your the other lectures I did. I picture him at his desk, 16 years old, 26 years old, trying to write, but there's violence all around. If he turns on the news, there was a bombing. Maybe his cousin went to the store for milk and got shot by a machine gun. So it's fairly disjointed, his writing style. But pay attention to that if you're writing that, if you're doing that question. On the sheet, I said West versus East. We are number one, money over religion. And maybe things are a little different now because of the coronavirus, but in general, the world seems to pay more attention to the United States because they have more money and more power for the last 200 years. When I was in Iowa and I designed the syllabus, Rodriguez and Anzaldúa are about Hispanic culture. I considered maybe there was a connection sitting in Iowa between the way the United States treats Mexico and the way Israel treats Palestine. But there's a lot of sections, if you read through his text, where all he has left is a necklace or a deed, and there's sort of objects for sale. There's no more Palestinian culture, no more heroes. That's kind of faded in the background. Now it's just an object of his grandmother's that he may have kept for 50 years. And I also said something about forcing Western concepts on them, how they treat women. I mentioned this briefly in another one of my lectures, but should we as Americans, as feminists, intercede on their behalf and help the women, can't vote, can't drive, have to marry who their father says, or no, it's their culture, we leave them alone. Or maybe our internet slowly but surely trickles down and they see the way we live, and maybe slowly but surely their culture changes. Number 4 says no stability, land equals roots, stability, and Palestinian identity. Maybe think about when you go to your grandmother's house at Thanksgiving or Christmas and you're with your cousins, what that concept of family means to you, with that concept of stability. Do you identify as an American? You wave an American flag. Do you identify as a Texan? You wave the flag of Texas. And that does, I've lived in 4 states, and Texans seem more proud of being Texans than Iowans feel about being Iowans. So do you identify as an American? Do you identify as a Texan? Do you identify as Mexican? Do you identify as Hispanic American? Do you identify as Southerner? And what that means, and I think a lot of that might connect to where you're from, your land, who you are, where you grew up, your grandmother's house, what you have for what you eat on New Year's Day. And in Virginia, we have oyster stew and black-eyed peas, and that's a cultural thing for me. But black-eyed peas are luck, but oyster stew at my Aunt Nora's house, I feel like I have an identity. And I think Said is saying there's a section where there's a guy at a conference, a farmer, that says, you kicked me out of Palestine, I lived in Africa. You kicked me out of Africa, I went to Europe. You kicked me out of Europe, I went to America. Where am I home? Where can I feel home? Do I feel stable? Where can I relax? And it doesn't seem like there's anywhere where the Palestinians can relax and feel safe and be at home. Number 5 says picture theory. That doesn't come from a book. That comes from me. I'm kind of loud, and sometimes people walk by, and I'm loud. But picture theory, it comes from me. It's not in a book. But I asked, do we read them? Do we see them as poor, as violent, and kind of like Rodriguez and Hogarth we marginalize them as poor. So they're like a story in a book. They're a lesson we do in class. They're not real people to us in 2020 fighting for survival. They're just characters in our textbook. So do we read them? Does that imply that we pity them? They don't have boats and iPads like us. They're not as important as we are. We look down on them. We pity them. And maybe there's a fine line between objectifying them, pitying them, and wanting to help them. But my note says we are the subject, they are the object. We have all the money, we have all the guns, we have all the power. They're an object over there. Again, maybe the coronavirus will change that. Maybe it won't. But at least that's how I normally teach this. And my note says Americans are the norm. So, I mean, that kind of works for everyone. But what's on our television, our fashion, our movies, like I think the rest of the world knows American movies, knows American fashion. I don't think they know Palestinian movies. I don't think they know Palestinian music or fashion. So as you read this, consider the fact that we are kind of sort of the norm, and they're just an object, a character we're reading in a book. And then number 6 says, will there ever be peace in the Middle East? And my parents would go with the Bible and say, there's been wars and rumors of wars in the Middle East throughout time. Palestinians hate Israelis, and Israelis hate Palestinians. They always have, and they always will. If you take away the bombs, they'll fight with guns. Take away the guns, they'll fight with knives. But maybe it has to do with religion. That could be like a paper thesis. But do you think there will ever be peace in the Middle East? And I'm, 40 whatever years old, and every 2 weeks for my entire life, somebody in the Middle East has killed someone else. So I'm inclined to believe they're always going to be fighting. Okay. See you later, 1301.